Do you ever get the sense that a story wasn't really made to be told? Do you ever see an online conversation about a movie that seems really intricate and deep, but then you watch it yourself and you just feel like you're missing things? Like you're watching it wrong somehow? Like you'd need to spend hours poring over the footage to even sort of get what's really going on? Do you ever see images or video clips from a game world so expansive and beautiful that you just have to see it firsthand? But then you try and it's just legitimately too difficult for you. Can't even get far enough to see it. And even if you do manage to, you still don't really get what's going on in it. So maybe you go watch a video essay about it. Maybe you watch a long play. You read a Reddit thread or a Twitter thread assembled by minds more equipped than yours to experience this experience. And okay, you get to see roughly what the thing is about. And that's nice. But in your gut, you know it's just not the same. No matter how willing you are, no matter how much attention you pay or how much effort you pour in, when the experience just seems to resist you to the point that you can't really consume it, don't you start to wonder, why? Why make something like this? Why create a story that doesn't want to be told? I've been using the phrase stories that don't want to be told. There's actually a more formal name for this kind of work. It's called ergodic literature. It's a term which comes from the Greek words ergon, work, and hodos, path. Literature which requires the reader to work to carve a path to the text. Media which is, meaningfully, hard to consume. And when I say meaningfully here, I do mean it. Work, in this context, isn't just some emergent quality. Game of Thrones isn't ergodic literature just because there are a lot of moving pieces to keep track of and you have to pay attention. One Piece and Wheel of Time aren't ergodic literature just because they're incredibly long and require a lot of time, which, depending on your outlook, you could consider work. Sprawling canons like Marvel and Star Wars actually tend to be extremely accessible, even if fandoms try to make them feel more ergodic by laboring over a correct viewing order or a proper canon. Not even stories with branching narrative paths like choose-your-own-adventure novels or, dating sims really fit the bill. Not a lot of media really does this. It's an uncommon thing for a piece of media not just to be difficult to consume by the nature of how it was written or how expansive it is or how many decisions it gives you, but by its very design, intentionally keeping you from getting to the story. This is why I called them stories that don't want to be read. It's part of their conceit. They're designed this way on purpose. The term was coined by Espen J. Arnseth in his 1997 book, Cybertext. In ergodic literature, he says, non-trivial effort is required to allow the reader to traverse the text. More, for example, than eye movement in the periodic or arbitrary turning of pages. In other words, the act of reading, not just understanding, but reading, requires extra work. The reading itself has been made difficult. Seeing as you're here on this channel about fiction and storytelling, I'm going to guess you've already got an example in mind. One particularly infamous book known for its uniquely antagonistic formatting, for its pages upon pages of appendices, indices, footnotes, references, footnotes within footnotes, and straight-up gibberish, among many other things. House of Leaves is the very essence of ergodic literature incarnate. I mean, there are parts of this book that you have to physically hold up to a mirror to read properly, and that's barely the tip of the iceberg. House of Leaves is a book that demands you be active in its reading. If you aren't flipping back and forth, placing multiple bookmarks to keep track of which sub-footnote of which sub-narrative you're currently reading a reference to in the back of the book, you're going to get lost quickly. But again, that's sort of ergodic literature in its purest form. It gives you a frame of reference for what this looks like at perhaps its most extreme. It's not always like that. Despite the massive disclaimer I gave earlier about everything ergodic literature is not, and how there are very few pieces of media that do this, there is a thirst for it out there, and a surprising number of authors and audiences looking for ways to slake it. Maybe more now than ever, in fact. Have you ever heard of an ARG? It's another one of those things where, since you're watching this channel, I'll assume you have some passing familiarity. Alternate reality games are sort of uniquely positioned to maybe be the most ergodic of all modern literature, if, literature is the right term here. We're using it broadly. Sure, there are some projects of this sort that fall more into the realm of unfiction, like Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, works that don't really have any game elements and are more designed just to look and feel like a plausibly real thing. But then there are projects, lots of projects, like Everyman Hybrid or The Sun Vanished, where audience interaction directly influences how the plot unfolds. And once the plot is done unfolding, it's kind of it. The experience is over. It's not like the books or the games I mentioned earlier. It's media that's difficult to read because it doesn't even actually exist until the audience puts effort in to create it. You can watch an explainer video or read a Google Doc about it afterward, but you miss that unique path-carving moment that defines the experience, the thing that keeps it from being just an immersive piece of unfiction. It doesn't have to be that grand in scale, though. It doesn't even have to be that committed to being ergodic. Movies, perhaps the most linear and least interactive medium of all, have been doing this kind of thing for ages. Go back to 2001, the year after House of Leaves was published, and you get Donnie Darko, a movie everyone knows and nobody understands. Making sense of the actual plot in this movie has been a fan obsession for the last 2 decades and some change. Just look at this Reddit thread. Imagine all the work that went into acquiring and laying out this information. You couldn't possibly get there just by watching this thing. Speaking of which, is this making you think of anything? Fandoms coming together to riddle over obfuscated pieces of lore, laboring obsessively over the act of finding the story in their favorite media? No, I'm not talking about game theory. That's something else. We'll talk about it in another video. I'm talking about video games. There's a sort of interesting strain of video games which do this very well. Games that turn the play itself into a barrier. Rainworld, Hollow Knight, everything by FromSoft, all of them hide their story behind the play. They are, of course, notoriously hard, to the point that many people will never actually try them, but beyond that, these games literally will not even tell you what they are about. You could play from start to end, actually make it all the way there through all the challenges, and basically have no idea what happened. The brutal play pattern isn't enough. You have to do more than play. You have to work, explore, find hints, pay attention to context clues in the world, all of this just to get to the story. And even when you do finally get to it, the lore is usually so fragmented and vague, the majority of the story you uncover still technically amounts to speculation. Which is why, years after their release, the fan communities around these games are still discussing them, still hard at work divining their mysteries, still arguing about the millions of details and how they all fit together. By now, they've done enough work that you can just watch one of the thousands of explainer videos out there. The fan wikis for each of these games are full to bursting. It is, in every case, a monumental display of community effort and organization, well beyond the scope of simply consuming the media. I look at all of this, all the devotion and legitimate work people have poured into this, I have to wonder, why? What drives this infatuation? What is it about these stories that resist the effort to be told that drives people to borderline obsession with the act of telling them? There's a debate about the Dark Souls games, and by extension all FromSoft games, that's been raging for the better part of a decade now. On the one hand, if the company gave their games in easy mode, it would certainly make them more accessible, wouldn't it? I mean, not everyone will have the skills to meet the challenge and get to the story. It'd be nice if there were a way to bring that challenge down to a place where they could face it, right? On the other hand, well, here's an excerpt from an article I found in my research that I will not source, which really gives voice to the other side of the argument. This goes out to everyone who say they play games for their story and don't want to deal with hard challenges. Well, here's my 2-word response to you. Screw you. We don't do that shit here. Gaming is where real men test their mettle, and Dark Souls is the ultimate test. A lot to unpack there. Look, I'm not trying to build a straw man here. Obviously, this is a very uncharitable expression of the argument, but setting aside the weird masculine vibrato and teenage angst, I do think it's a kind of accurate one. It seems like there's a very personal sense of achievement that players view as inherent to the experience, that it wouldn't be Dark Souls without a very specific level of non-negotiable difficulty. Even the game's director says that he created them to be satisfying to beat, that toning down the difficulty would remove that feeling and break the games at their core. And you know what? They're right. It literally would be a different game. Even if somehow the game were functionally identical in every way, save only for the amount of effort the player needed to put into the experience, isn't it naive to think it would feel the same? I defined ergodic literature earlier. Remember? How the term ergodic itself basically means working to create a path. I think that's actually a really useful metaphor for understanding the appeal of media like this and why people get so passionate about it. These are experiences that require more than just effort from you. They require participation. These stories do not and cannot tell themselves. They force you to be engaged with the experience of consuming the work rather than just the end result of it. In the end, whatever information you acquire, whatever conclusions you come to, those are secondary to what it was like to work your way toward it. Reading about an ARG after the fact will never replace being there for its discovery. Watching a video essay about a Cryptic film will never replace the journey of solving the puzzle yourself. Scouring a fan wiki for an expensive game will never replace the experience, the challenge of playing it. So, in a sense, I understand where this sentiment in the Souls-like community comes from. I get the desire to protect the experience that you cherished and to make sure others have access to it as well. I get wanting to preserve that aspect of the game. But you can't. Art just doesn't work that way. Even the most approachable piece of media will change depending on how you approach it. Maybe the cover art reminds you of an experience you had in your youth. Maybe one of the characters is a lot like someone you know. Maybe you have a religious background and you see spiritual subtext where a secular reader wouldn't. All of these things fundamentally change what it will feel like to consume the media, and none of them are things the author can control for. I don't think the challenge ergodic literature presents is an instruction manual on how best to consume it. It's not there so everyone who finds their way to the text can look back at one singular, objective, difficult path there and say, yes, I did that too. To me, the exciting thing here is that these challenges create space for you, the audience, to engage your own creativity. Not just your skills in navigating a path, but your ingenuity in creating a unique path. It's fun to surmount a challenge. It's magical to experience a version of it that no one else has. In a way, this desire to create a unified concept of the media's difficulty is the opposite of that. The argument that Dark Souls can't have an easy mode because it would feel different to the people playing it that way also implies that Dark Souls should only be experienced one way, that its challenge is discrete, defined, sacrosanct, and should never be different for anyone. Which is, in my opinion, a very antagonistic perspective toward an audience who wants to engage creatively with this kind of work. It's not as if an easier version of the game wouldn't still be difficult to some players. It's not as if the lore isn't still hidden throughout the world and hard to access. The challenge is there. It's built into the game. That's the nature of works like these. It's okay if it differs somewhat from person to person. To me, that's the point. A phenomenon I see a lot with works like this is the fixation on getting it right. Getting the information right in the end, solving the story, demonstrating your skill by doing it the hard way. But I don't think that's what these stories are really asking from us. I think that's more a matter of ego or something, I don't know. Ergodic literature is designed fundamentally incomplete. If you put in the effort and get to the end result and all you have to show for it is the objective material of the text itself, the story has not actually been told. Because the real story, the one that makes this stuff so obsession-inducingly fascinating to the people who consume it, is the one you create in the process. It's not that these stories don't want to be told, it's that they can't tell themselves. They need you for that. Of course, how useful you'll be to that story really depends a lot on how much you know. Literacy isn't just a matter of fiction or creativity, it's a matter of education. Do you have the background to understand the text? Have you learned enough? Unfortunately, on an institutional level, that just isn't true for a lot of people anymore, especially when it comes to education. Public school isn't really a one-size-fits-all solution, and seeking your own education is increasingly reserved for people with enough money to pay for it. But it doesn't have to be that way. Our sponsor, Brilliant.org, can make all of that far more affordable and far more fun than it's ever been before. Brilliant has really been helping me broaden my horizons. I can always go to the site, click into a course, pick up where I left off, and take in a bite-sized piece of the fundamentals I've been missing. Whether it's maths, science, physics, anything and everything STEM, Brilliant has something for you. Lately for me, it was Brilliant's Thinking in Code class, which I feel is oddly appropriate for me. I can really feel it just opening up a whole new world to me that I had almost no idea was there before. Slowly but surely, as I educate myself in this way, the AI revolution isn't looking quite so intimidating anymore. And to be perfectly honest, it doesn't even really feel like studying. A lot of what you do on Brilliant might be better classified as minigames? Look how interactive and fun these are. This one even has robots. Because Brilliant is so simple, moves at your pace, and starts at the very fundamentals, this is actually something that's really sticking for me. Almost like a personal tutor or coach. A legitimate, accessible, affordable, easy education, even for someone like me, with my head in the clouds and my face ever buried in fiction. And the best part? You can start for free. Visit brilliant.org/TaleFoundry or click the link in the description to get your first 30 days for free. And if you like what you see and you want to sign up, TaleFoundry fans get 20% off. Just make sure you use our link. Again, visit brilliant.org/TaleFoundry to get your first 30 days for free and 20% off a year subscription. Don't let something as simple as a lack of education hold you back. Try this out for free and be as brilliant as I know that you can be. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thanks for watching and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next week. Bye!